When I was cleaning my husband's car, I found documents for a secret account with $2 million under the seat. I said nothing and quietly photographed everything. The next day, my lawyer was already filing the documents in court. Good day, dear listeners. It's Diana again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video. And also let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. People always ask me when I first knew, and the honest answer is, I knew long before I admitted it to myself. For 14 years, I was Daniel Hargrove's wife. We lived in a 4-bedroom house in Naperville, Illinois, the kind of neighborhood where people wave from their driveways and bring casseroles when someone gets sick. We had 2 kids, Mia, who was 11, and Cooper, who was 8. I worked part-time as a dental hygienist 3 days a week, which gave me enough structure to feel like a person and enough flexibility to be the one who remembered pediatric appointments and school picture day. Daniel was in commercial real estate. He wore good suits. He knew how to shake hands. That was the life. Clean, organized, unremarkable in all the ways people secretly want their lives to be. But marriages don't collapse overnight. They erode. Slowly, the way water eats through limestone. You don't see it happening until suddenly there's a hole. The first thing I noticed was the phone. Daniel had always been reasonably private with it. Men in business often are. But sometime around early spring of that year, something shifted. He started taking it with him everywhere, to the bathroom, to the garage. Once I walked into the kitchen at 2 a.m. to get some water, and he was standing at the counter, back to me, typing fast. He heard my footsteps, locked the screen, and set it face down before he even turned around. "Couldn't sleep," he said. "Me neither," I said. We stood there in the dark kitchen like 2 strangers sharing an elevator, and neither of us said another word. Then there were the trips. Daniel had always traveled for work. That was nothing new. But the frequency changed. What used to be once a month became every 2 weeks, then weekly. Short trips. "Just overnight," he'd say, already halfway to the door. I stopped asking where because the answers were always vague and somehow just plausible enough to make me feel crazy for pressing. The credit card statements stopped coming to the house. He'd switched to paperless, he said, more convenient. I told myself I was imagining things. I was tired. I was prone to anxiety. My therapist had told me that years ago, and Daniel had used it as a gentle weapon ever since. You overthink everything, Mara. You always assume the worst. And so I had learned, over the years, to doubt my own instincts, to swallow the unease and smile at dinner, and ask the kids about their homework. But the body keeps score, even when the mind refuses to. I stopped sleeping well. I started checking the clock when he left the office and calculating how long the drive home should take. I noticed he no longer asked about my day. I noticed he had started going to the gym, religiously, suddenly, at 43, and bought new cologne. Not the kind I would have chosen. Was I jealous? Maybe. Was I paranoid? Possibly. But was I wrong? No, I was not wrong. It was a Saturday in October. The kids were at my mother's for the weekend, which was a small mercy I didn't know I would need. Daniel had taken my car to get it serviced, some gesture of consideration that, looking back, I wonder about, and left me his. I needed to drive to the grocery store. Before I left, I decided to clean out the back seat because Daniel's car was always a disaster. Coffee cups, gas receipts, a forgotten gym bag. I reached under the front passenger seat to check for anything that might have slid underneath. Cooper had a habit of losing things in cars, and my fingers touched paper, a folded manila envelope, stiff, full. Not a receipt, not a registration. I sat in the driveway and opened it. Inside were account statements, a private account at a bank I didn't recognize, Cayman National Bank. The account was in Daniel's name only. The balance, as of that September, was $2,147,000. I read the number 3 times. Then I sat very still and listened to the sound of my own breathing. $2,147,000 in an account I had never heard of, in a bank I had never seen on any of our financial disclosures, in a marriage where I had believed we made decisions together. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I had expected them to shake. Instead, something in me went very quiet. Not numb. Quiet. Like the moment before a storm when the wind stops completely and the birds disappear and the air itself seems to hold its breath. I took out my phone. I photographed every page, front and back, slowly, methodically, making sure each image was clear and in focus. Then I folded the envelope exactly as I had found it, slid it back under the seat, and went inside. I made dinner. I waited for Daniel to come home. I smiled when he walked in, and I said nothing. That night, I lay beside Daniel and stared at the ceiling for 4 hours. He slept. I watched the shadows from the streetlight move across the bedroom wall, and I thought about money. About $2,147,000 in a Cayman bank account. About 14 years. About what that number meant and what it would cost me not to do anything about it. There are moments in life when you are given a choice that isn't really a choice at all. You either act or you disappear. A little more of yourself gone every time you look the other way. I had been disappearing for a long time. I just hadn't had a name for it. By morning, when Daniel's alarm went off at 6:15 and he padded to the shower without saying good morning, I already knew 3 things with complete certainty. First, the money was hidden. Not invested, not in a joint account, not in any vehicle I had ever seen on our taxes. It was hidden deliberately, systematically in a way that required planning. You don't accidentally open an offshore account with $2 million in it. Second, I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with before I moved a single inch. The worst thing I could do was react emotionally, confront him, scream, threaten. That would give him time to move the money, change accounts, cover tracks. Whatever I did next had to be precise. Third, I could not trust anyone in my immediate circle. Not yet. Not my friends. Half of them were mutual friends. Not my mother. She would panic and call Daniel trying to fix things. Not anyone who might even innocently tip him off. So I did what I always do when I'm afraid. I made a list. On Monday morning, after I dropped the kids at school, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a legal pad, and I wrote down everything I knew. The bank name, Cayman National, the account number visible on the statement, the balance, the dates. The fact that the most recent statement was from September, meaning the account had been active at least through last month. Then I wrote down what I didn't know. How long had the account existed? Where had the money come from? Was this all of it? Or were there more accounts? Was there a paper trail connecting it to our joint finances, our taxes, our mortgage, his business? And then, because I am a thorough person, I wrote down what I stood to lose if I did nothing. Illinois is an equitable distribution state. I knew that much from a conversation I'd half overheard at a friend's divorce years ago. Marital assets are divided fairly, not necessarily 50-50, but fairly, which meant that if Daniel filed for divorce tomorrow and I didn't know about this account, I would never see a cent of it. He had already hidden it. He would keep hiding it. And whatever judge looked at our case would see only what Daniel put in front of them. $2 million. Gone. Simply because I had been too afraid to do anything. I folded the legal pad in half and tucked it into my purse. That afternoon, while Cooper was at soccer practice and Mia was at a friend's house, I drove to the public library 3 towns over. I didn't want to search from home. Our internet was on a shared account, and I didn't know how much Daniel paid attention to browser history. At the library, on a public computer, I spent 2 hours researching. I looked up forensic accountants. I looked up divorce attorneys in Cook County with experience in hidden assets. I looked up the Cayman National Bank. It was real, it was legitimate, and it was specifically structured in ways that made asset discovery difficult, but not impossible if you had the right professionals. I wasn't looking for revenge that afternoon. I want to be honest about that. What I felt wasn't rage. It was something colder and more functional. It was the feeling of someone who has been lied to for a very long time, finally deciding that the lying stops here. On the drive home, I thought about Daniel, about the way he could look at me across the dinner table and seem completely present while being, apparently, entirely somewhere else, about the new cologne, about the overnight trips, about the phone, always face down. Was there a woman? Probably. The money and the distance rarely happen in isolation, but that almost felt like the smaller betrayal. The money was the architecture of a plan, a deliberate, patient plan to leave our marriage with everything and leave me with nothing. That thought didn't make me cry. It made me focus. I had one rule for myself going forward: say nothing, show nothing, smile at dinner, ask about his day, be the wife he thought he had, for exactly as long as it took me to be ready. When I walked back into the house that evening, Daniel was already home, pouring himself a drink, watching the news. "Good day?" he asked, not looking up. "Quiet," I said. "How about yours?" He shrugged. "Long." I went into the kitchen and started making dinner, and I thought, not for much longer. I found her through the library search, though I didn't call her from home. Her name was Patricia Holt. She was a family law attorney based in Oak Park, 22 miles from our house, far enough that I wouldn't run into anyone I knew in her waiting room. Her firm's website listed her specialties in a clean, confident order: high-asset divorce, complex property division, hidden asset discovery. She had a photograph on the site. She looked like someone who didn't rattle easily. That was exactly what I needed. I called from my work phone on a Tuesday during my lunch break, sitting in my car in the parking lot of the dental office. Her assistant scheduled me for Thursday at 10. For 2 days, I carried that appointment the way you carry something fragile, carefully, always aware of it, never setting it down. I didn't write it in our shared family calendar. I told Daniel I had a continuing education seminar for my dental license. He didn't ask a single follow-up question. Why would he? I had never given him reason to be suspicious of me. The office was on the second floor of a brick building near the Oak Park Library. Patricia Holt was in her mid-50s, wore small gold earrings, and shook my hand the way people do when they actually mean it. She had a box of tissues on the corner of her desk. I appreciated that she didn't make a point of it. I handed her the photographs printed on plain paper from a copy shop 2 towns over, paid in cash. 14 pages of Cayman National Bank statements. She looked at them for a long time without speaking. Then she looked up at me. "How long have you been married?" she asked. 14 years. "Do you know when this account was opened?" The earliest statement I photographed was from 18 months ago, but I don't know if there are older ones. She nodded slowly. "Is your husband in commercial real estate?" "Yes. He owns a partial stake in a development company. His name is Daniel Hargrove. Hargrove Alden Properties." She wrote that down. Then she said, "Mrs. Hargrove, What you've brought me today is significant. An undisclosed offshore account is not a technicality. In Illinois, deliberate concealment of marital assets is treated seriously by family courts. This gives us a foundation to work with." She paused. "But we need more. We need a forensic accountant to trace how this money got there and whether it connects to marital income." "How long does that take?" "Weeks, possibly months, depending on cooperation and subpoenas. But we start now." I signed a retainer agreement that morning, $15,000, which I paid from my personal savings account, money I had accumulated quietly over 3 years from my paychecks, for no reason I could have consciously named at the time. Some part of me, apparently, had been preparing. Driving home, I felt the strange lightness of having finally transferred the weight of this thing from my chest to a professional set of hands. Patricia Holt was now holding the envelope. I just had to keep the surface of my life undisturbed. But that was becoming harder. That same week, I don't think it was coincidence, Daniel started paying attention again. Small things. He asked where I'd been on Thursday. He noticed I'd been quieter than usual. One evening, he came into the kitchen while I was washing dishes and stood behind me and put his hands on my shoulders, something he hadn't done in months, and said, "You okay? You seem far away." I turned and smiled. "Just tired." He studied me for a second too long, then he nodded and left. Later that night, lying in bed, I thought about that look. Had I slipped somewhere? Had I been too quiet or not quiet enough? Or was he simply the kind of person who could sense a change in the weather the moment someone stopped being afraid of him? What I didn't know then, and only found out much later, was that someone had told him. Not about the attorney, not about the photographs, but his assistant at work, a woman named Christine Park, had noticed that a records request had come in from a financial compliance firm, the first step in the forensic accounting process. She'd mentioned it to Daniel over dinner, because Christine Park was not just his assistant. She had been his girlfriend for 16 months. I found that out 6 weeks later when Patricia Holt's investigator compiled a preliminary report and left it on my kitchen table in a sealed envelope while I was at work. I opened it that evening after the kids were in bed. The report listed 3 things: the confirmed date the Cayman account was opened, 4 months after Daniel began his relationship with Christine, the estimated source of funds, which traced back to redirected commissions from 3 major property deals, and Christine Park's name with a note. Subject appears to have knowledge of the account and may have assisted in structuring. I set the report down. I picked up my phone. I texted Patricia Holt 3 words. "I'm ready. Let's go." There was no going back now. I had the motive, the money, and the name. What happened next would not be an accident. It would be a plan, executed 1 step at a time, with the precision of someone who had nothing left to lose by being careful. The divorce petition was filed on a Wednesday morning. I wasn't there when the process server delivered it to Daniel's office. Patricia Holt had advised against it. "This isn't a movie," she'd said. "Being present for the serving creates unnecessary escalation." And I had taken her advice. Instead, I was at work, cleaning a patient's teeth, listening to them talk about their vacation plans, while 22 miles away my husband received a legal document that listed, in clear and formal language, every lie he had told for the past 4 years. He called me 11 minutes after the serving. I know because I looked at my phone during a break between patients. I didn't answer. He called again, then texted, "We need to talk. Now." I put my phone face down in my locker and finished my shift. By the time I got to my car that afternoon, there were 6 missed calls. 4 from Daniel, 1 from a number I didn't recognize, 1 from our joint financial advisor, James Kellerman. which told me Daniel had already started making calls. He was not someone who waited passively for anything. That was actually one of the things I had once admired about him. Patricia had prepared me for this. He will try to contact you directly. He will try to make it personal. He will try to get you in a room without attorneys present so he can manage you the way he's always managed you. Her instructions had been simple. Don't respond to his calls. Don't have any conversations about the case outside of her presence, and document everything. That evening, Daniel came home to find me making dinner. He stood in the kitchen doorway, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. He looked different. The composed, confident husband I'd known for 14 years was still there in the posture, but something around the eyes was off. Controlled anger. The kind that has been tamped down quickly, like a fire you've thrown a blanket over, still burning underneath. "You went to an attorney," he said, not a question. "Yes." Without talking to me. "I did." "Mara." He took a step into the kitchen. "This is insane. Whatever you think you found, we can sit down, we can talk. We can work this out between ourselves without—" "I'm not going to do that," I said. I kept my voice level. I kept stirring. "You're making a mistake." "That may be, but it's mine to make." He left the kitchen. I heard the front door close. He didn't come back that night. 2 days later, Christine Park called me. I don't know how she got my cell number. Perhaps from Daniel's phone. Perhaps from somewhere else. But she called me on a Friday afternoon while I was picking up groceries, and I answered because I didn't recognize the number, and part of me already knew. Her voice was calm in the way that required effort. She told me her name. She said she thought we should talk woman to woman. She said that Daniel had explained everything to her and that I had misunderstood what I'd found. That the account was for investment purposes, completely legitimate, and that if I continued this legal process, I would be embarrassing myself and hurting my children. "Your children," she said, as though she had any relationship to them whatsoever. I stood in the frozen foods aisle and let her finish. "Christine," I said, "I appreciate the call. My attorney will be in touch." And I hung up. Later that evening, I called Patricia and reported the contact. She noted it. "This is good for us," she said. "It shows consciousness of guilt. They're scared." But scared people are dangerous. I knew that even then. The following week brought what Patricia called the pressure campaign. Daniel's attorney sent us an aggressive counterfiling questioning the validity of my forensic accounting request. Our joint accounts were frozen, a temporary measure that Daniel had initiated, clearly trying to put me in a position of financial vulnerability. Daniel's family attorney also sent a letter suggesting I was creating parental instability by introducing legal conflict into the home. That one stung. I won't pretend it didn't. I spent one very bad evening sitting on the edge of the bathtub after the kids were asleep, shaking. Not crying, just shaking. The way your body processes what your mind refuses to dwell on. I had 2 children. I had a part-time income. I had a husband who was now mobilizing resources I didn't fully understand. And I was 41 years old starting over from a kitchen I wasn't sure I'd get to keep. But then I thought about the number. $2,147,000. Moved carefully, deliberately over 16 months into an account with my name nowhere on it. Not an accident. Not a misunderstanding. A plan. He had made a plan for a future without me. The least I could do was return the favor. I called Patricia the next morning. "Whatever they throw at us," I said, "we keep going." "That's what I was hoping you'd say," she said. I took that weekend for myself. I drove the kids to my mother's, told her I needed 2 days, and went home and slept. Read. walked around the neighborhood in the early mornings when it was quiet, let my nervous system remember what stillness felt like. By Monday, I was ready again, and they had no idea. The offer came through Daniel's attorney on a Tuesday. It was framed politely, the way all legal threats are when they need to sound reasonable. Daniel was proposing a collaborative settlement, a private mediation outside of court, where we would divide assets amicably and avoid prolonged litigation that affects the children. His offer included the house, primary custody of Mia and Cooper, a monthly support payment, and a lump sum of $180,000. I read the document twice, then set it on Patricia's desk. She watched my face. "He's offering me 9% of what he hid," I said. "Approximately, yes. He thinks I don't know the full number. He's betting on it." She paused. "Or he's betting that you're frightened enough to take what's on the table rather than fight for what you're actually owed." Was I frightened? Yes. Was I going to let that drive a decision I would spend the rest of my life regretting? No. "Decline it," I said. She nodded. "I'll draft the response." On my drive home, I thought about the calculation behind that offer. $180,000 was real money, enough to restart, enough to be grateful for if you didn't know better. Daniel had chosen that number carefully. It said, "I'm being generous. Take this and be quiet." It assumed I was operating from fear and financial pressure, that I would accept the appearance of fairness without demanding the substance of it. He had spent 14 years watching me doubt myself. He thought that habit was still intact. It wasn't. That evening, I did something I had been putting off. I called my friend Diane. Diane Kowalski had been my closest friend since graduate school. She was sharp, fiercely private, and she had been through her own difficult divorce 4 years earlier. She was the one person I knew who wouldn't panic, wouldn't gossip, and wouldn't tell me to think about how Daniel must be feeling. She lived 40 minutes away in Evanston, and when I called her that Tuesday evening and said, "I need to tell you something," she simply said, "Come over." I sat at her kitchen table for 3 hours. I told her everything. The envelope, the account, the photographs, Patricia Holt, Christine Park, the settlement offer. I told her about the shaking in the bathroom and the frozen accounts and the letter about parental instability. I told her about the morning I'd driven to the library 3 towns away to search in private and how even then I'd kept waiting for someone to tell me I was wrong. Diane listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, she poured us both another cup of tea and said, "You are not overreacting. You are underreacting, if anything." That landed somewhere inside me like a stone finding the bottom of still water. "I keep waiting to feel sure," I said. "You found the account statements," she said. "You photographed them. You hired a forensic accountant. You filed. What exactly is the threshold for being sure?" I didn't have an answer. "Daniel has been working on this for at least 16 months, she said. "You've been working on it for 6 weeks, and you're already ahead of him legally. Give yourself some credit." Diane also had practical advice. She connected me with her own divorce attorney's former paralegal, who gave me a list of questions to ask Patricia about asset discovery timelines. She helped me set up a separate email account for sensitive documents, and she told me, quietly but firmly, that her guest room was available whenever I needed it, no questions asked. I drove home that night feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not happy exactly, but accompanied. Meanwhile, Daniel and Christine were not sitting still. I learned this gradually through small signals. Daniel had started attending Mia's soccer games again, something he'd skipped for months, and making a point of being visibly warm with the kids in public places where other parents would notice. He bought Cooper new cleats. He showed up to a school event with a prepared dish for the potluck and chatted with other parents the way a man does when he is building a perception. He was creating a record of himself as an attentive, present father. It was strategy, not sentiment. Christine, for her part, had apparently told at least 2 of their mutual acquaintances that I was going through a mental health crisis and that Daniel was trying to be patient. I heard this secondhand through a neighbor who didn't realize she was delivering it like a weapon. It should have shaken me. Instead, I wrote it down: date, source, content. I handed the note to Patricia at our next meeting. She added it to the file. That was the thing they couldn't seem to understand. Every move they made to undermine me was also evidence. Every attempt to isolate me, reframe me, diminish me, was going into a folder that was growing thicker by the week. I didn't need to fight them in parking lots or at school events. I just needed to keep showing up. To court, to Patricia's office, to my children's lives. Clear-eyed and prepared. While they strategized, I documented. While they performed, I built a case. They were very good at appearances, but appearances don't survive discovery. They came on a Saturday morning, 10 days before the first scheduled court hearing. I was in the kitchen when Daniel's car pulled into the driveway. The kids were with my mother for the weekend, something I had arranged carefully, though I hadn't known specifically that this visit was coming. Maybe some part of me had. I watched through the kitchen window as Daniel got out. Then the passenger door opened and Christine Park stepped out. I had seen photographs of her by then. The investigator's report had included several taken in public places. She was 31, 10 years younger than me, with the kind of put-together appearance that reads as effortless but isn't. She was wearing a cream blouse and holding a small paper bag, pastries I would discover, as though this were a casual drop-in between friends. I took a breath. Then I went to the door before they could ring the bell. Daniel's expression was set to something I recognized: careful, managed warmth. He had been using that face on me for decades. "Mara," he said, "can we come in? Just for a few minutes. No attorneys, no formalities, just us." I stepped back. "Let them in." We sat in the living room, them on the couch, me in the chair across from them. Christine set the pastry bag on the coffee table like an offering. Nobody touched it. "I know this has been hard," Daniel began, "for all of us, and I want you to know that I take responsibility for not being as transparent as I should have been about certain financial decisions." Certain financial decisions. That was how he named $2,147,000 hidden in the Cayman Islands. "I understand why you feel betrayed," he continued. "That's real, and I'm not dismissing it. But Mara, what we're building with this legal process, the effect it will have on Mia and Cooper, the years of their lives it will consume, I need you to think about that." Christine leaned forward slightly. Her voice, when she spoke, was warm in the manufactured way of someone who has rehearsed warmth. "I know this is awkward," she said, "me being here, but I care about Daniel, and I care about what this is doing to his family, your family. The kids deserve parents who can cooperate." I looked at her, then at Daniel, then back at her. What struck me most sitting in that living room was how confident they were. They had come here believing, genuinely believing, that if they showed up together, composed and reasonable, I would fold. That the sight of them as a united front would remind me of my own isolation and make me small again. They had known me as someone who absorbed, accommodated, and eventually retreated. They didn't know who I'd become in the last 2 months. "Daniel," I said, I appreciate you coming." He visibly relaxed. "My attorney's information hasn't changed," I said. "If there are terms to discuss, they go through her." The relaxation vanished. "Mara, I'm not being difficult. I'm being appropriate." I kept my voice even. Attorneys exist precisely for conversations like this one, so that emotions don't get in the way of clear agreements. If you have a proposal, put it in writing and send it to Patricia Holt's office. Christine's composure cracked, just slightly at the edges. "We're trying to be civil," she said. "I know," I said. "So am I." "You're being completely unreasonable," she said, and the rehearsed warmth was gone now, replaced by something sharper. "Do you have any idea what you're doing to him, to his reputation? He had plans." "Christine." Daniel put his hand on her arm. She stopped. He looked at me with an expression I had never seen on him before. Not anger, not the managed warmth. Something close to helplessness. And for a brief moment, in spite of everything, I felt the specific sadness of recognizing a person you once loved as a stranger. "You're going to regret this," he said quietly. "Maybe," I said, "but that's for me to decide." They left 5 minutes later. Christine walked out first, the untouched pastry bag still on my coffee table. Daniel paused in the doorway and looked back at me once, the look of a man calculating odds and not liking the answer. And then he was gone. I locked the front door. Then I sat down on the kitchen floor. Not because my legs gave out, but because the floor felt solid and I needed that. I sat there for a few minutes with my back against the cabinet, letting the silence of the house settle around me. My hands were shaking slightly, not from fear exactly, more from the release of sustained effort, the way your muscles tremble after you've been holding something heavy for a long time. Was I afraid? Yes. Somewhere underneath the clarity was a cold current of genuine fear, of what they might do next, of how far Daniel would push, of what a prolonged fight could cost in money and time and the orderly rhythms of my children's lives. But the fear and the resolution lived in the same place inside me. Each time one rose, so did the other. It was the most peculiar thing. The more they pushed, the more certain I became, as if every act of pressure from their side was striking a flint, generating each time a small and useful spark. I got up off the kitchen floor. I threw away the pastry bag. I texted Diane. They came. I held the line. Then I called Patricia Holt's office and left a voicemail describing the visit in full, including Christine's comment about Daniel having plans, which struck me even then as something worth preserving. 10 days until the hearing. I went upstairs and I started to get ready. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday at 9 in the morning at the Cook County Circuit Court in Chicago. I had stood outside that building once before, years ago, when Daniel and I had gone to finalize paperwork for our house. We had held hands on the steps. I remembered thinking how permanent everything felt, how settled. Now I walked in alone, in a navy blazer I had bought specifically for this day, carrying a leather folder with printed copies of everything. Patricia Holt met me in the hallway outside the courtroom at 8:45, and she ran through the sequence one last time, quietly and efficiently, the way doctors do before procedures. "The forensic accountant's report is our foundation," she said. "We have the account statements, the transaction history, and the trace source of funds. We have the testimony of the compliance officer at Hargrove Alden, who noticed the commission rerouting. We have the timing. The account opened 4 months after the relationship with Christine Park began. This is a clear pattern. Let the evidence carry the story." "I know," I said. "Don't react to him in the room." "I won't. No matter what he says." "Patricia," I said, "I've been practicing this for 2 months." She almost smiled. "Then let's go in." The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Functional, not theatrical. Wood paneling, fluorescent lighting, the faint smell of old paper. Daniel was already seated at the opposing table with his attorney, a man named Richard Sharp, who I'd researched and found to be competent but not exceptional. Daniel was in a dark suit. He looked composed. He did not look at me when I walked in. Christine was in the gallery 3 rows back. She had no legal standing to be at counsel's table. I noted her presence and did not acknowledge it. The judge was the Honorable Sandra Voss, late 50s, unimpressed by theatrics, known by Patricia's staff as someone who had seen every version of this story and had limited patience for posturing. Good. Richard Sharp's opening strategy was to attack the forensic accounting methodology. He questioned the chain of custody for the account statements, arguing they had been obtained improperly through documents found in a private vehicle without consent. It was a reasonable argument, and I had expected it. Patricia was ready. She produced documentation showing that Illinois law permits spouses to access financial documents found in shared marital property, including jointly used vehicles. She produced the title to Daniel's car. In both our names, a point Daniel had apparently forgotten when he left the envelope there. She also introduced the testimony of the forensic accountant, submitted in writing, which traced the commission rerouting through Hargrove Alden's own internal records obtained through proper legal subpoena. The account statements weren't even the primary evidence anymore. The subpoenaed business records were. Daniel's composure began to change at that point. It was subtle. A tension around the jaw, a stillness that was slightly too rigid. He leaned over to whisper to Richard Sharp. Sharp nodded, made a note, kept his expression professional. Then Patricia submitted the communication records. These were something Daniel had not anticipated. In the weeks following his visit to my house with Christine, our phone carrier had produced, under subpoena, a log of calls between Daniel's phone and Christine Parks during the period when the account was structured. There were also 3 text messages, retrieved from a deleted backup that the carrier's records still held, in which Daniel had written to Christine about making sure the transfers go through before Q4, and Christine had responded with the account routing number. She had not just known about the account. She had helped coordinate the transfers. Judge Voss read the exhibit summary in silence. Then she asked Daniel's attorney whether his client wished to revise his initial financial disclosure statements. Sharp asked for a brief recess. It was during that recess, standing in the hallway outside the courtroom, that Daniel finally looked at me. He had aged somehow in the last 2 months, or maybe I was simply seeing him clearly for the first time in years. "Mara," he said. His voice was low, and there was nothing calculated in it now, just something exhausted. "How long have you been planning this?" "Since October," I said. "Since I found the envelope." He nodded once, like he was absorbing a diagnosis. "The money," he began. "Your attorney can discuss the money with mine," I said. He looked at me for another moment. Then he went back inside. In the gallery, I caught a brief glimpse of Christine's face. The warmth was entirely gone. She looked very young and very frightened, which I noted without satisfaction. Fear is not justice. What happened in the next 20 minutes was closer. When court resumed, Richard Sharp informed Judge Voss that Daniel was revising his financial disclosure to include the Cayman account and 3 additional accounts in Delaware and Nevada that the forensic investigation had identified but not yet fully documented. 3 additional accounts. I wrote the number on the corner of my notepad and underlined it. Patricia did not look surprised. I suspected she had expected this. When someone hides money once, they rarely do it just once. Judge Voss ordered full financial disclosure within 30 days, imposed a temporary asset freeze on all newly revealed accounts, and scheduled a follow-up hearing. She also noted for the record that the communication evidence suggesting Christine Park's involvement in the structuring of the accounts had been referred to the court's Financial Compliance Office for review. It was not a final verdict. It was a beginning. But it was the right beginning, the kind that doesn't reverse, that only builds forward, brick by careful brick. I walked out of that courthouse at 11:15 on a Thursday morning in a navy blazer, and the autumn light was flat and practical and entirely ordinary, and I was entirely steady. The next 4 months were not easy. I want to be clear about that. A legal victory isn't a single moment. It's a sustained effort, a grinding forward motion that asks for patience at the exact moments when you most want resolution. There were difficult weeks. There was a period in January when Daniel's attorney attempted to argue reduced culpability on the grounds that the offshore account had originally been opened for tax optimization purposes, a phrase I found so audacious it almost made me laugh. There were nights I sat with the kids' bedtime routines carrying the weight of everything I couldn't say to them, couldn't show them. Mia had started asking questions. Not the right questions yet, but close enough that I had to be careful. But through all of it, the case continued to build. The forensic accountant, working from the newly subpoenaed records of all 4 accounts, produced a comprehensive report that Patricia called the strongest she had seen in 15 years of practice. The total figure was $3,840,000, not $2 million, not even close. Over 22 months, Daniel had systematically redirected commissions, sale bonuses, and reinvested returns into a network of accounts structured specifically to escape disclosure in the event of divorce proceedings. The Delaware and Nevada accounts had been opened under a shell LLC, a company with a name I had never heard of, because Daniel had registered it using his mother's address without her knowledge. That last detail, Patricia told me quietly, was not going to help him with the judge. Christine Park's role was formally investigated by the state bar and an independent financial compliance review. She had, as the text messages showed, actively assisted in routing the transfers and had received, in separate payments that looked like consulting fees, approximately $85,000 over the course of the scheme. She was not a passive bystander. She was a participant. The final hearing took place on a Tuesday in late February. Outside, it was gray and bitterly cold, the kind of Chicago winter day that asks nothing of you except endurance. I drove myself downtown. Patricia met me in the lobby. Judge Voss had reviewed the complete forensic report, the communication records, the Shell LLC documentation, and Daniel's revised financial disclosures, which had themselves required 2 amendments, each one revealing more than the last, each one making his initial posture of cooperation look precisely like what it was: delay. She ruled all 4 accounts, $3,840,000, were classified as marital assets subject to equitable distribution. Given the deliberate concealment, the sustained nature of the fraud, and the documented intent to deprive me of access to marital property, Judge Voss applied an unequal distribution standard. I was awarded 60% of the total concealed assets, in addition to an equal split of all legitimately disclosed marital property, which included our investment accounts, retirement funds, and the family home. She awarded me primary physical custody of Mia and Cooper. She ordered Daniel to pay my attorney's fees. Richard Sharp stood very still when the ruling was read. Daniel sat with both hands flat on the table, looking at the surface as though the wood grain might contain some answer. He did not look up. I did not look away. Outside, in the hallway afterward, Patricia shook my hand. Her grip was firm and warm. "Well done," she said. It was not effusive, which was why it meant something. I drove home through the gray February city and I thought about October, the smell of cold air through the car window, sitting in the driveway with a manila envelope in my lap, reading a number that had rearranged everything. The decision to be still rather than reactive, to photograph rather than confront, to plan rather than panic, to trust that precision would serve me better than desperation. 14 years of a life. And the thing that saved me from leaving with nothing was 45 seconds of steadiness in a parked car. As for Christine, the Financial Compliance Review resulted in a formal referral to the State Attorney General's office regarding potential fraud charges related to the transfer structuring. Her employment at Hargrove Alden was terminated within a week of the hearing. Daniel's business partner, Marcus Alden, had distanced himself from Daniel entirely once the Shell LLC came to light, and the two were in separate litigation over the misused commissions. Daniel's professional reputation, which had been the armor he'd worn through all of this, was significantly damaged. Not destroyed. He was still a capable man, and capable men find ways to rebuild. But the story of the hidden accounts had moved through our professional community the way stories do in small worlds, and his operating landscape had narrowed considerably. I held no particular feeling about that. Not satisfaction, not guilt, just the neutral acknowledgement of consequence. The house sold in April. I had decided I didn't want to stay in it. Too many rooms with the wrong history. I found a townhouse in a quieter neighborhood, smaller, with a yard big enough for the kids and a kitchen with good light. I signed the lease on a Wednesday afternoon and stood in the empty living room for a long minute, listening to nothing. It was, I realized, the first space in 4 years that was entirely mine. The first summer in the new house, Mia learned to ride a bike without training wheels on the sidewalk out front, and Cooper planted sunflowers in the narrow strip of garden along the back fence. They didn't all survive. He'd planted them too close together. But 4 of them made it, and they grew absurdly tall, taller than Cooper himself, and he was unreasonably proud of that fact. I would stand at the kitchen window in the mornings with coffee and watch the yard, and I would feel something I could only describe as the return of ordinariness. Not excitement, not triumph, just the quiet texture of days that belonged to me. That took longer than I expected, the belonging. Even after the ruling, after the house sold, after I'd signed the new lease and moved Mia's posters onto different walls, there was still a period of adjustment that no one quite prepares you for. Winning doesn't immediately feel like winning. It feels like exhaustion and paperwork and sitting alone at a kitchen table working out a new budget. I went back to work full-time at the dental practice. My employer, Dr. Rafferty, had been quietly patient with me throughout the proceedings without ever making it awkward, and returning to a full schedule gave me the structure I needed. I found a good therapist, not the one Daniel had referenced when he called me anxious, but a woman named Dr. Keene, who specialized in life transitions and didn't romanticize difficulty. She helped me understand what I had carried for years without realizing, and what I could now put down. Diane remained my closest friend. We had dinner once a month, sometimes more, at her kitchen table in Evanston. One evening she said, "You never got loud. That's what got them." I thought about that a lot. By fall, I had rebuilt our financial life into something I understood completely and managed entirely on my own. The The settlement had given me a foundation, enough to secure the kids' educational funds, set up retirement accounts in my name alone, and create an emergency reserve that wasn't dependent on anyone else's decisions. I took a personal finance course. I met monthly with a fee-only financial advisor. I understood now every account, every balance, every transfer. I would never again be in a position where money I was entitled to could disappear quietly under my nose. That felt like a second victory, smaller, less dramatic, but perhaps more permanent. Daniel and Christine did not have the year they had planned. The Attorney General's review of Christine's role concluded in early spring. The state declined to pursue criminal charges. The evidence, while damning civilly, was not sufficient for a criminal conviction. But the process had been exhausting and expensive for her. Her career in financial services was effectively over. The licensing board had flagged her record. She took a position at a retail management company 2 states away. Daniel and Christine had moved in together shortly after the divorce was finalized. By the following spring, mutual acquaintances confirmed they were no longer together. I didn't pursue details. I suspected that a relationship built in the shadow of fraud has its own structural problems, that the version of themselves they had presented during the scheme was not the version that showed up when consequence replaced excitement. Hargrove Alden Properties was restructured. Marcus Alden bought out Daniel's stake at a significant discount. Daniel was working independently now in a smaller market with a narrower client base. He paid his court-ordered support reliably. Our communication about the children was formal and functional. Whatever he had done to me, he was still their father, and I did not interfere with that. Mia, who was 13 by then, sat on the edge of my bed one evening while I was folding laundry and said, "Mom, were you scared?" "Yes," I said, but the scared part and the doing it anyway part happened at the same time. She nodded slowly, filing it away. Cooper planted sunflowers again the following spring. This time he read about spacing requirements. All 7 survived. He stood in the yard at the end of summer and counted them, and I watched from the window and thought, that's the whole lesson right there. You give things room. You give yourself room. And then, if you've done the work, things grow.